A store that was once a part of everyday American life is quietly closing its doors. The parking lot that used to be full on a Saturday afternoon now has more empty spaces than cars. The shelves that used to be stocked from one end of the building to the other are starting to look thin in places nobody expected. And the brand name above the entrance that millions of Americans grew up trusting without question is now appearing in bankruptcy filings and closure announcements that most shoppers never see coming. Across the country, something is quietly happening to some of the biggest retail names in America, and today we are looking at 12 major stores that will probably disappear forever. Saks Global Saks Fifth Avenue was never just a store. It was a destination. The kind of place where the shopping bags alone felt like a statement, and where the window displays on Fifth Avenue stopped pedestrians on the sidewalk every single holiday season for decades. At its peak, Saks represented the very top of American luxury retail. A brand so established and so deeply embedded in the culture of aspirational shopping that its survival felt like a given. But in January 2026, Saks Global filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The collapse came directly from a $2.7 billion acquisition of Neiman Marcus in 2024 that buried the company under debt it could not service. The company missed a $100 million interest payment on December 30, 2025. Total debt at the time of filing sat between $1 billion and $10 billion. The luxury image that Saks spent a century building could not survive the weight of what one badly structured deal did to its balance sheet in less than 2 years. Neiman Marcus. Neiman Marcus was the other name inside that same collapsing deal. A luxury department store with more than a century of history behind it, that spent its final years being passed between private equity owners who loaded it with debt it was never going to be able to repay. When Saks Global acquired Neiman Marcus for $2.7 billion in 2024, the deal was supposed to create a luxury retail powerhouse capable of competing at the highest level of American shopping. Instead, it created a combined entity so buried under financial obligations that it filed for bankruptcy within 18 months of closing the acquisition. The Neiman Marcus name that had defined luxury shopping for generations of American consumers became a liability on a balance sheet rather than an asset on a street corner. Two of the most storied names in American luxury retail collapsed into each other and then collapsed together. JCPenney. There was a time when a JCPenney anchor at the end of a mall corridor meant that mall was going to be fine. The store was that reliable, that permanent. Families came here for back-to-school shopping, for holiday gifts, for the kind of everyday clothing purchase that did not require a special occasion or a special budget. JCPenney built its reputation over more than a century on the idea that quality merchandise at fair prices was something every American family deserved access to. And for most of that century, that idea worked. The chain grew to more than 1,100 locations across the country and became one of the most recognizable retail names in America. But the forces that have been pulling JCPenney apart did not arrive suddenly. They built slowly over years of declining mall traffic, rising competition from online retailers, and a series of strategic decisions that damaged the brand in ways that proved impossible to fully reverse. A disastrous attempt to eliminate sales and coupons between 2011 and 2013 drove away the core customers the chain had spent decades building relationships with. The recovery from that period never fully materialized. In 2020, JCPenney filed for bankruptcy protection and closed nearly 150 stores as part of its restructuring. The chain that emerged was smaller and more fragile than the one that went in. In 2026, more store closures are continuing as the malls that JCPenney depends on keep losing foot traffic to online shopping and lifestyle centers that have replaced the traditional enclosed mall model entirely. Analysts who have studied the department store sector closely have said that the question for JCPenney is no longer whether it will survive in its current form, but how much longer the current form can hold together before the remaining locations become impossible to justify keeping open. A brand that once anchored hundreds of American malls is now the thing those malls are quietly trying to plan around losing. Kohl's always positioned itself as the smarter alternative to the traditional department store. No mall required. Convenient standalone locations with parking right outside the front door. A loyalty program that rewarded customers so consistently that the Kohl's cash system became genuinely beloved by the shoppers who used it. For years, that positioning worked well enough to make Kohl's one of the most stable mid-tier retailers in the country. But the numbers that have been accumulating over the past several years tell a story that the positioning can no longer paper over. Kohl's stock lost nearly 70% of its value over a period that saw comparable store sales decline quarter after quarter, with no sustained recovery in between. 12 analysts who cover the stock gave it a consensus sell rating, a level of collective pessimism that is unusual even in a struggling retail sector. The company closed 27 stores across 15 states in 2025 as part of a restructuring effort that was supposed to stabilize the operation and focus resources on the locations most likely to perform. But closing stores in a retail environment where the underlying problem is not the real estate but the relevance of the concept does not fix the core issue. Kohl's has spent years trying to find the right partnership or the right pivot that would bring new customers through the door. The Sephora shop-in-shop deal brought some traffic. The Amazon return program brought some foot traffic, but neither initiative produced the kind of sustained sales recovery that the company needed to change the trajectory that the financial results kept confirming. The customers who built their shopping habits around Kohl's are aging. The younger customers who are replacing them are not choosing Kohl's the way their parents did. And in retail, there is no slower or more certain form of decline than a brand that is deeply loved by a customer base that is gradually shopping less and not being replaced by anyone new. Rite Aid. Rite Aid is not a store that is probably going to disappear. It is a store that has already disappeared. The process just took long enough and happened gradually enough that millions of Americans who used to fill their prescriptions here barely registered the moment it was over. Rite Aid filed for bankruptcy for the first time in October 2023, carrying more than $4 billion in debt accumulated over years of failed acquisitions and a business model that was being squeezed from every direction at once. The company emerged from that first bankruptcy smaller than it went in but still operating. Then, in early 2025, it filed for bankruptcy again. The second filing was the one with no recovery attached to it. By September 2025, Rite Aid had closed all of its remaining locations permanently. A pharmacy chain that had operated thousands of stores across the United States for decades simply ceased to exist. The communities that felt the closure most acutely were not the ones in major cities where CVS and Walgreens locations were often within walking distance of the shuttered Rite Aid. The communities that felt it most were the smaller markets where Rite Aid had been the only pharmacy for miles and where the closure left elderly residents without a place to fill the prescriptions they depended on every single month. The debt that killed Rite Aid was not the result of one bad decision. It was the accumulated weight of years of trying to compete in a pharmacy market that was consolidating around larger players with deeper resources, while Rite Aid kept trying to grow through acquisitions it could not afford. The brand is gone. The buildings are sitting empty in strip malls across the country, and the communities that depended on what those buildings contained are still figuring out what comes next. GameStop. GameStop was the place you went when a new game came out, and you needed to be there on launch day. The midnight release events that turned a Tuesday night into something that felt like an occasion. The used game section where you could find something you had missed for a fraction of the original price. The pre-order bonuses that gave you a reason to commit early. GameStop built its entire business around the physical experience of buying and selling video games, and for a long time that business was genuinely thriving. At its peak, the chain operated more than 5,800 locations across the United States, making it one of the most widely distributed specialty retailers in the country. But the shift to digital game downloads did not happen slowly. It happened fast, and it happened completely. When a customer can buy the same game from their couch without getting in a car, the only thing that brings them to a GameStop is a habit strong enough to override the convenience of staying home. Habits that strong do not survive indefinitely, especially when the generation that built them grows up, and the generation replacing them never developed the habit in the first place. The famous 2021 short squeeze that briefly turned GameStop into the most talked about stock in the country did not change the underlying business. It changed the stock price for a few weeks, and then the underlying business reasserted itself. In 2026, GameStop is closing hundreds of additional locations as the company searches for a reason to exist in a retail landscape where the product it was built to sell is increasingly delivered without any physical store involved at all. The locations that remain open feel less like a thriving retail operation and more like the last few survivors of something that the market has already decided is finished. Big Lots built its reputation on the thrill of the unexpected find. The closeout merchandise that showed up on the shelves without announcement and disappeared just as quickly. The furniture section that somehow always had something worth considering. The seasonal displays that turned a routine shopping trip into something that felt a little bit like a treasure hunt. For the customers who loved Big Lots, the appeal was genuine, and it kept them coming back in a way that more predictable retailers never quite managed to replicate. But the financial structure underneath that retail experience was never as stable as the loyal customer base made it appear. Big Lots filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in September 2024 and was acquired by Variety Wholesalers in what looked at the time like a rescue. 15 months later, Big Lots is closing stores again. The rescue that was supposed to give the brand a new foundation turned out to be temporary stability rather than genuine recovery. The closeout merchandise model that made Big Lots feel special to its customers is also the model that makes the business extremely difficult to run profitably at scale. When your entire value proposition depends on finding merchandise at prices low enough to pass genuine savings to the customer, your margins are thin by design. When costs rise across the supply chain and consumer spending tightens, those thin margins become impossible ones. 2 bankruptcies in 15 months is not a streak of bad luck. It is the market telling a brand something that the brand has not yet fully accepted about whether its model works in the environment it is currently operating in. Family Dollar was supposed to be the answer for communities that Walmart had not reached and that dollar stores had not fully served. The neighborhood retail option for the customer who needed everyday essentials at prices that worked on a budget that did not have much room in it. At its peak, Family Dollar operated more than 8,000 locations across the United States, making it one of the most widely distributed retail brands in the country, particularly in rural and lower-income urban markets where options were already limited. But the acquisition by Dollar Tree in 2015 for nearly $9 billion created problems that neither company ever fully resolved. The 2 brands operated on fundamentally different models, and the attempt to run them under a single corporate structure created friction that showed up in the financial results year after year. In 2026, Dollar Tree is closing more than 370 Family Dollar locations and has been actively exploring a full sale of the brand to a separate buyer. When your own parent company is trying to sell you, it is a specific kind of signal about how much confidence exists internally in the brand's future. The communities that will feel the Family Dollar closures most are the same communities that were already underserved before the stores opened. Rural areas and low-income neighborhoods where Family Dollar was often the closest option for household essentials are now watching that option disappear without a clear replacement in sight. QVC/HSN. QVC and HSN together represented something that felt genuinely unique in American retail for decades. The television shopping channel that turned the act of watching someone demonstrate a product into a purchasing experience that millions of Americans built real routines around. The hosts who became familiar enough to feel like guests in the living room. The limited time offers and the countdown clocks that created urgency without anyone having to leave the house. There was a specific kind of comfort in it. You did not have to go anywhere. You did not have to navigate a parking lot or a crowded store. You sat in your living room and the store came to you, and a host you recognized explained exactly why the thing being demonstrated was worth having. At its peak, QVC Group reached more than 90 million homes across the United States and generated billions of dollars in annual revenue from customers who had made television shopping a genuine part of how they bought things. That number is worth sitting with because it speaks to just how deeply this model worked for a very long time for a very large number of people. But the internet did not just compete with QVC and HSN. It made the core proposition of television shopping feel unnecessary. Every advantage that a shopping channel once offered, the product demonstration, the expert explanation, the sense of discovery, became available online at any hour without needing to find the right channel at the right time or wait for the item you actually wanted to come around in the rotation. In 2026, QVC Group filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, carrying approximately $6.6 billion in debt. The restructuring plan that followed reduced that debt significantly, and the company emerged from bankruptcy with a leaner balance sheet. But a restructured balance sheet does not answer the fundamental question of whether a linear television shopping model can find and hold enough customers in a media environment that has moved almost entirely to on-demand digital content. The debt can be reorganized. The audience that made this business possible in the first place has been quietly moving somewhere else for years, and no bankruptcy filing brings them back. 7-Eleven is so embedded in the American landscape that most people stopped seeing it years ago. It became part of the background. The lit sign on the corner that was always there regardless of what else changed around the intersection. The Slurpee that has been a cultural reference point for so long that it barely needs to be advertised to be remembered. Big Gulp. Hot dogs rotating under warming lights. The specific smell of a convenience store that every American recognizes without being able to fully describe it. 7-Eleven grew to become the largest convenience store chain in the world, and for decades that scale felt like its own form of protection. A brand that is literally on every corner is a brand that is very difficult to imagine not being there. But in fiscal 2026, 7-Eleven announced plans to close 645 locations across the United States. That announcement did not come without warning. The company had already closed 592 locations in 2024 and 2025, following a 26% drop in customer purchases since 2019. That decline did not happen because Americans stopped wanting convenience. It happened because the definition of convenience changed around 7-Eleven faster than the company was able to change with it. Gas stations expanded their food and beverage offerings until the distinction between a gas station and a convenience store became difficult to identify. Fast food drive-thrus got faster and more accessible. Grocery delivery apps eliminated the need to make a physical stop for many of the items that once made a 7-Eleven run feel like the obvious solution to a small immediate need. More than 1,000 locations closing over a 2-year period, while customer purchases declined by more than a quarter, is not a story about underperforming real estate. It is a story about a brand that pioneered a retail category and then watched that category get absorbed by competitors who did not need a separate store to offer the same thing. The corner that 7-Eleven occupied for decades is still there. The question is how much longer 7-Eleven is the thing standing on it. Macy's is one of the oldest and most recognizable retail brands in America. The Thanksgiving Day parade that has stopped traffic on 34th Street every November for a century. The Herald Square flagship that has been a New York City institution longer than most of the buildings surrounding it. The name that for generations of American shoppers meant department store shopping done at its most complete and most satisfying. Walking into a Macy's on a Saturday afternoon felt like walking into a place that had always been there and always would be. The perfume counters on the ground floor. The escalators carrying shoppers between floors stocked with everything a household could need. The white sale that families planned around every January. That version of Macy's was genuinely powerful for a very long time, and the loyalty it built across generations of American shoppers was real, in a way that most retail brands never achieve. But the Macy's of 2026 is a fundamentally different operation than the one that earned that reputation, and the direction of travel over the past decade has been consistently and unmistakably toward a smaller footprint and a less certain future. The company announced plans to close 150 underperforming locations as part of a strategy to concentrate investment in its strongest stores and its luxury brands, including Bloomingdale's and Bluemercury. In January 2026 alone, 14 additional store closures were confirmed across 12 states, with shoppers in those communities losing their local Macy's with relatively little warning and no clear replacement for what the store had provided. The department store model that Macy's represents has been losing relevance steadily for more than a decade. Online shopping captured the routine purchases that once required a trip to the mall. Fast fashion captured the impulse purchases that once filled the clothing floors. And the mall itself, the environment that Macy's anchor stores were designed to anchor, has been declining in foot traffic year after year in ways that no single tenant can reverse on its own. What remains of Macy's is a brand trying to define a smaller and more focused version of itself before the market defines an even smaller version for it. The closures that have already happened suggest that the window for that redefinition is narrowing faster than the strategy is moving. For the communities that have already lost their location, the question of whether Macy's survives as a brand is considerably less urgent than the question of what fills the anchor-sized hole it left behind in the mall that is now trying to figure out what comes next without it. Tuesday morning. Tuesday morning was never trying to be everything to everyone. It was a specific kind of store for a specific kind of shopper, and it knew exactly what it was in a way that gave it a clarity of identity that many larger retailers spent millions of dollars trying to manufacture. The off-price home goods retailer that stocked designer and brand name merchandise at deep discounts for the customer who was willing to take the time to look. The merchandise changed constantly. The inventory was never quite predictable, and that unpredictability was not a weakness in the business model. It was the entire point. The possibility that the item you had been looking for at full price somewhere else might be sitting on a Tuesday morning shelf at a fraction of the cost was genuinely exciting to the loyal customers who made regular visits a habit they had no interest in breaking. At its peak, Tuesday morning operated more than 700 locations across the United States and had built one of the most devoted niche followings in American off-price retail. These were not casual shoppers stopping in because the store happened to be nearby. These were customers who knew which location in their area was worth visiting and on which days new inventory tended to arrive and who planned their schedules around making sure they did not miss it. That kind of loyalty is genuinely rare in retail, and it is the kind of loyalty that makes a closure feel like a personal loss rather than just a business story. But the financial pressures that had been building for years finally proved impossible to manage. Tuesday morning filed for bankruptcy in 2023 and attempted a restructuring that was supposed to give the brand a path forward with a reduced store count and a tighter, more focused operation. The restructuring did not hold. The remaining locations closed permanently. The brand name still exists in a technical sense, but the physical stores that gave it meaning are gone. For the shoppers who had built their home decorating habits and their weekend routines around Tuesday morning, finds the closure left a gap that a website or a different off-price chain cannot genuinely fill. The hunt was the experience, the specific pleasure of walking into that specific store and not knowing exactly what you were going to find was something that existed nowhere else in quite the same way. When that disappears, it does not get replaced. It just becomes one more thing that used to be there. Looking at all 12 of these stores together, the most striking thing is not the bankruptcies or the closures, it is the pattern. Every single one of these brands was once so embedded in American life that disappearing felt impossible. The parking lots were full, the brand names were familiar. The assumption that they would always be there was so strong that most people never thought to question it. And then quietly, without a single dramatic announcement, the foot traffic slowed and the locations started closing, and the thing that felt permanent turned out not to be. Some of these stores are already gone. Others are closer to the end than their remaining locations suggest. Which one of these brands do you actually remember shopping at? Drop it in the comments below. Your memories might shape what we cover next.